Good evening and welcome, Littleton, to the November 8th, 2023 Board of Health meeting. For the board members, I was informed that Mr. Davis will be unable to attend this evening, and Ms. Pelletier, our administrative assistant, is delayed for a family issue. So we do have 3 members here. We have a quorum, so we can begin our meeting. Our first hearing for 7 p.m. is a public hearing for 3 Brant Lane. We have Soilsmith Designs requesting variances for local upgrade approval. I see a Doug Smith in the audience. Doug, I believe you are our presenter for this, so I'm going to be promoting you to panelist. Doug, if you're there and can hear us, I have put in the request to promote you to panelist. You just have to click accept, and we can begin the hearing for 3 Brant Lane. Okay. Is anyone here in the audience for 3 Brant Lane? So I do have a previous email from Mr. Smith, whose name is in the audience, but he's declined to be promoted to panelist at this time. I do believe, however, he is on our list presenting for this hearing.
I believe
I'm going to try promoting him one more time. I'm going to try promoting him one more time, and then we will move on.
I guess now I'm all in.
Mr. Smith, welcome to the Board of Health meeting.
Thank you.
You are now here. All right, if you'd like to, we can start with you presenting what you're requesting and what the plan is.
Okay. This is a replacement septic system for a 3-bedroom house. To get the system to fit on the property, I'm requesting some variances. The very first one is the state local upgrade approval. It's 310 CMR 15405-1H. And that would be local upgrade approval for, instead of having the septic 4 feet above high groundwater, to have a 24-inch reduction and to have the system 24 inches above high groundwater. And that's with a Presby EnviroSeptic system that is allowed. The reason I'm asking for this particular variance is, if I don't, the system will be higher and the breakout won't fit. As it is now, I've got the system far enough from the building and far enough from the garage slab, and the fill stays on the property, but is only 3 feet away from the boundaries where the roadside. So if this variance for the height wasn't granted, it would definitely either require a wall or a poly barrier or some other variance to get things to fit. And I felt this was the best situation for coming close as I can to meeting regulations and getting the system to fit. Now, the second variance is 310 CMR 15405-1I. And that's use of a sieve analysis in lieu of doing a perk test. The soil was too wet for me to perform a perk test the day we did the testing, on September 19th, 2023. So I sent it to UMass Lab and got the results. The third variance, also a local upgrade approval, has to do with the pipes going in to the septic tank, leaving the septic tank and going into the pump chamber and leaving the pump chamber. It's required to have a 12-inch separation from high groundwater to where the pipe penetrates. And I was not able to have that 12-inch separation because of the water table that exists where the tank and pump are going. I was able to provide 9 inches going into the tank, 6 inches leaving the tank, 5 inches going into the pump, and 4 inches leaving the pump. So there still is separation. They're not in the water, and I am using tanks that have rubber boots with clamps, so the chance of any kind of leakage or groundwater getting in is slim to none. And I did specify in the plan to have monolithic tanks, monolithic 1,500-gallon 2-compartment tank and a 1,000-gallon monolithic pump chamber. So there's no seams, no chance of any leakage there. Then the Littleton Board of Health variance is regulation 23 and 27. And that's saying that no portion of fill can go within 10 feet of a property line. The only place where it's within the 10 feet is the actual road itself, that boundary line, not affecting any abutters, neighbors, that type of thing, but strictly the pavement. And it's from the actual boundary line setback from the pavement, it's 3 feet away instead of the required 10. And I did notify all the abutters 10 days prior to this meeting to do with that particular regulation 23 and 27 fill requirements. So that's basically what I'm looking for. And it's this system where I designed it is pretty much where the existing one is now. So what they would end up doing is digging the whole old one out, bringing in all brand new ASTC 33 fill, which is required with the Presby system, and then putting that mounded system right basically in the same spot. So I think it's for this upgrade, and the system did fail with Title V, so they do need a new one. The house is being sold, so I think I've done the best I could on this site. The site's only 10,410 square feet. It's about a quarter acre, very small. So are there any questions any of you would want to ask me?
Before we get to that, Mr. Smith, would you be able to share the plan with us to show it on the broadcast?
A few days ago, I had emailed the admin, and she said she would either do it or one of you.
Perfect. Dan's got it.
Apologize, I'm muted. Is it up? I see heads. Thank you, sir. All right, before we, unless anyone has any pressing questions, Jim Greffey, our health agent, is unable to be with us tonight. I do have notes from Jim. I'm going to read Jim's notes, and then we will work to the board for any questions, and then we'll go to any public comment or questions. So from Jim, 3 Brant Lane, the sewer disposal system for this site has failed a Title V inspection and needs to be replaced. Soil testing was conducted, and the seasonal high water table prevented a perk test from being performed. A sieve analysis was conducted to determine an appropriate perk rate. The site has additional constraints which make it very difficult to design a system in compliance with Title V and your local regulations. This lot is small and has a house footprint. The house footprint minimizes the area available for the replacement of the system. The designer has proposed a replacement system design, which requires reduction of the groundwater offset to the bottom of the leaching area from 4 feet to 2 feet. Mass DEP allows boards of health to grant up to a 2-foot reduction of the groundwater offset when the system design includes an innovative system like the Presby system, which is being proposed. Groundwater reduction will lower the system height, which will help the surface grading around the house and the lot lines. If the system is designed as the required groundwater offset, it would likely need retaining walls at the house and property lines. Because groundwater was high, a perk test could not be conducted, and the system size was based on a sieve analysis of the soil. The small lot and high water table will necessitate system fill, which will get within 10 feet of the lot line. The designer has proposed a grassy swale to direct water to the low end of the lot. The site is served by town water, and there are no wetlands within 100 feet of the system area. I think the requested relief is reasonable. I will need to work with the designer to get some additional surface elevations around the house to assist the installer with the final grading of the new system. Those are our notes from Jim. We will go around the board. From my view, we'll start that way. Matt Wason, do you have any questions?
I do. Right now, what is the distance that you have right now from the property line to the long edge of the field?
Mr. Smith, you are on mute if you're trying to respond. Mr. Smith, if you are available, you are on mute. We have a question about an offset from board member Wason. Are you able to respond? You are still on mute, sir.
Okay, I just unmuted. The closest place, it would be 21 feet, and that's when you see where the benchmark is, then the word that says property line, right about where the P is, or E in property line, that's where it's the closest because of the angle of that line. And from there right to the corner of the system near the D box, about 21 feet.
Okay, so you've got kind of 21 feet to the property line, and the fill is going to effectively go for 18 feet of that, spreading down, because you'd say that's within 3 feet of the property line, correct?
Correct. Yeah, you get the 15-foot breakout one, and then another small contour line from the slope, and that's the closest point. Yes.
Is there a chance on this road that that there's either a pre-existing easement potential for future sidewalk, and would that potentially cause issues, or would it be something where the field is probably far enough away that it might just mean a future retaining wall would have to go in? Do you know?
Yeah. Well, I did put what they call the grassy swale right at the end, so any water coming down would flow through that grassy swale, end up going a little bit past the benchmark and into that lower part. So no water should go on to the pavement itself from this fill extension and mounted. As far as if they were ever to put a sidewalk in there, you can see a line where it says edge of pavement. It's sort of small, but there probably would be room for a sidewalk to go between the actual physical property line and the edge of pavement. I can tell you how wide that is.
Yeah, I see. And that 21 feet helps, because that's what I was kind of, I just wanted to make sure it wasn't something really close to that. Because I know when they, not that they ever have a plan for it, but if they came in and said, we want to make the road a little wider and put a sidewalk in, then they encroach on that property. But I feel like 21 feet off the property line is probably going to be sufficient to not cause a problem there.
Yeah, and the other end of it, near where the vent is, the opposite end, it's more like 24 and a half feet on that side, 24-ish, something like that. So it's even a little better, but yeah, that's basically all I can tell you on that.
I think that's all I had. Thank you.
Okay, you're welcome.
Thank you, Matt. Kevin Baker, any comments, questions?
Mr. Smith, I was just wondering, what did the sieve analysis come back as, the class of the soil?
It came out as sandy loam, class 2 soil.
Okay.
I can tell you the percentages of sand versus silt and all that. I have it right here in front of me.
Okay. No, that's all right. I just didn't know if it was class 2 or 3 because the system looks rather large. But is 600 square feet the minimum?
Yeah, well, with pretty much any time a sieve analysis is done, if it comes out to be sandy loam, we have to use the 0.33. So for a 3-bedroom house, if this was going to be stone and pipe, it would need 1,000 square feet. But then you get that reduction with a Presby, and comes out to the size I have here.
And the only other question I had was, is an interior plumbing change possible to be able to bring the elevation of the tanks up out of the estimated high water table?
You know, since they always want 9 inches of cover over a tank, that's an issue too. So the plumbing really can't be changed, and then by the time it gets to the tank and the pump chamber, and to have the 9 inches of cover, that's sort of what stems the need of the variance to do with that inlet and outlet of the tanks.
That's a 9-inch minimum.
Yeah, 9-inch minimum cover. So where the pipes go in, you've got another foot of concrete on top of that. That's all part of the tank, and then the 9 inches of cover. So, and that's all required, and that helps with the buoyancy and everything too.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Baker. Actually, my questions were asked and answered, so I don't actually have any questions at this point. I'm going to stop sharing for a moment just so I can see my audience. Are there any audience members who would like to speak to 3 Brant Lane and their request for variances? I don't see any hands raised in the audience. At that point, I will accept a motion if it's the will of the board.
I'll make a motion to approve the variance requesting a local upgrade approval to allow reduction in the 4-foot requirement separation between the bed bottom of the soil absorption system and the high groundwater, and allow that 24-inch reduction to the groundwater table. Also to allow the use of a sieve analysis in lieu of a perk test, and to allow the reduction of the 12-inch separation between the inlet and outlet tees and the high groundwater for the tank and pump chamber pipe penetrations.
All right, I was making notes. Just make sure we have reduction in the groundwater.
And the fourth variance, to allow the fourth variance, the fill requirement to be within 10 feet of a lot line.
All right, we have a motion on the floor. Do I have a second?
I will second that.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion on the motion before we vote? Seeing none, we're going to do a roll call vote. Mr. Baker?
Kevin Baker votes yes.
Dr. Wasson?
Now Wason votes yes.
And the chair votes yes. Mr. Smith, good luck with the project.
Okay, thank you very much. I appreciate it.
And yeah, please work with Mr. Greffy, our health agent, for those last elevations that he had just wanted to work with you on. That would be appreciated.
Certainly.
With him for any questions. Thank you, sir. Have a great day.
Yes, you too.
Way ahead of me. Thank you, folks. All right. We are a few minutes past our 7:10 public hearing for the Board of Health regulations for private wells proposal. As background, we had worked on this for a while. That this year, the Massachusetts Department of Environmental Protection updated their model Board of Health regulations for private wells. It had not been updated since, I believe, the late 80s. So they've updated their model regulation. Model regulation is basically a starting point for local boards to have an expert input, have an expertly designed, engineered plan of regulations. And then obviously it is up to individual boards to either accept those as is, modify them to better fit their needs for their community, or simply not utilize them, not invoke them, and continue using whatever regulations they've been using. So we have been reviewing our model regulations, reviewing our current regulations and the model regulations to see how best to move forward if we need to change any of our existings. So if you give me a moment, I will pull up the model regulation with the edits that we have worked on in previous meetings. Apologize for the delay. That should give us the updated model regulations. Now, I know we've done a lot of work on this already. You have a lot more, I think, to kind of go through before we are, I think, ready to propose this as our final version. At the board's pleasure, we do have some notes from Jim. I'd like to start with those, and then we can do some internal work and where we think we are. All right, so from Mr. Griffey, our health agent, as we talked about, they've recently updated the model regs. The board's current well regulations are likely from the late 1980s, and they contain outdated references and state agency. And the state agency who regulates well drillers has changed. Additionally, the water quality parameters of concern have grown, such as PFAS, and more comprehensive testing may be appropriate. The push for geothermal heating and cooling systems has seen a rise in the number of permit applications for these wells. Our current regulations do not currently address geothermal wells. So they'd be held to the same standard as a potable water source. The new state model regulations are quite comprehensive. As you consider how you might want to change your regulations, I'd recommend the following. 1, as you consider the state regulations, think about possible costs to residents. 2, compare your list of well offsets to the chart in the state regulation. You may want to keep some of your current offset requirements. 3, the requirement in the state regulation may require more staff time to monitor and provide follow-up to ensure compliance, such as issuance of well certificates of compliance, water testing upon property transfer, for rentals, etc. Number 4, think about the water quality testing you would like to have in the regulation. I would recommend following the recommendations on the Mass DEP webpage. And 5, how would you like to handle irrigation wells? The model regulations indicate testing but require a notice on the deed, requiring a notice on the deed would be helpful, and a process to avoid cross connections with town water supply, which would also be valuable. Geothermal wells. Currently, we use the Mass DEP guidelines for permitting geothermal wells. And he's attached a copy of the model regulations, which is what's on screen and what was in our packet, and it's available on our website. So what is the pleasure of the board to approach where we are? We haven't looked at these as a group in some time. Would we like to review? Have folks looked at it and have particular item areas that they would like to start a discussion on? Mr. Baker, your hand is up. I'm taking your lead, sir. Whatever you'd like.
Sure. So I suggest that we decide who, and maybe this is Jim, starts to put together a definition of an agricultural irrigation well, as he noted in his notes, so we can add that to the list of terms. So we know exactly, we can define it, and we know what we're talking about when we're presented with an issue. Same thing with the geothermal well, defining exactly what that means as a part of these regulations. Just running through the document that we've already sort of marked up post a public hearing conversation. I believe it's section 6, the well location and use requirements, where we call out the setbacks. We've already sort of gone through and adjusted those to what Littleton has now, as opposed to what has been included in the model well regulations. So these are setbacks that we're used to, setbacks that have been used on countless engineering projects around town. So I propose we, as we already discussed as a board, to keep those in there as edited. And then moving through the document, my page 7, no, my page 8 is blank. Not sure what you're showing on your screen, because yours is blank
Also
too.
blank. I'd
I
say
don't
just
know if
probably just a bad page break in there.
well, we go to page 9, where we had no edits or changes. But then on page 11, we did have a long conversation about the water quality testing requirements. We actually struck the word testing from that header. And I believe this is the section where we really have to consider some of the costs for residents, and the best method to sort of accomplish what we need to accomplish, but also be very reasonable and empathetic towards what this is going to have to put in place in regards to testing and cost. And if we can somehow, I know we talked a little bit about partnering with an organization like Littleton Water Department to somehow leverage them to assist in the testing, but I don't know how far we got.
Lots of things just so we can plug in there while we can. I did reach out to them, and they actually were willing to talk to their testing vendor to see what might be available once we have actually a list of what we're looking for, so that they can actually get a meaningful response from their vendor. But they were open to kind of being that gateway, at least as an
awesome.
option for residents.
That's
so
nice. Yeah.
Sorry.
So I mean, in my to my knowledge, we looked at this list under number 3 of things we'd like to test for, and we all sort of felt really good about that. That might be like, the world that we were hoping to test for, and sort of see what that might cost and see what kind of a deal we could strike there. That's my memory of our conversation, and I didn't watch the meeting over again.
So I actually pull up. Dan, could you scroll down just like one line? Is there anything after PFAS? Okay.
Right.
But down there is where it mentions the gross alpha screen, I think is the next subheader here. Is that what that? Yeah. Okay.
Yep.
So I'm looking at the DEP list right now, which matches it exactly up until coliform bacteria. And then they actually don't list E. coli, but I'm happy. I think we should keep that in there because that's common. And then they say nitrate, and then they say radon, which I believe is also called out separately, gross alpha screen, and then VOCs, and then they end with PFAS. So are VOCs mentioned anywhere in ours right here? So no,
I'm not seeing them. No.
Oh, I did see E. coli mentioned down there. Oh, but that's up here already. So perhaps I think we should consider adding VOCs, simply because if we're trying to follow the DEP recommendation, that is on their current list of recommended tests. And then they have some timing for testing recommendations as well. It looks like everything is either put into a once every year category and a once every 10-year category. And I'm not sure that ours had the timelines called out.
I know we had a long conversation around this simply because of the cost that I think the the estimate was a few $100s.
Oh, yeah.
So
I mean,
that annual testing, I think, was a bit of a hang up for cost benefit for folks for an existing well that's not
so that's part of why I bring it up, because ours doesn't say something, or it says annually, and the DEP has most of those in a 10-year category, not an annual category, including PFAS. So I was quoted for my well recently, a PFAS test, just PFAS alone, I think was $480. And so that's a significant impact, especially since I have water remediation systems in place. And so I think my big hang up still is the financial impact is big if you require testing, just for a kind of vanilla homeowners, I would say, not a sale of a house, not a rental property, somebody who's just living there. Annual requirements can drive a lot of cost. And my feeling with the gap is still between the DEP and this paperwork is, if you have remediation systems in place that are maintained per manufacturer recommendation, should you be forced to continue to test every single time? I have a UV system in place. So what good is it to me if I test the water and they test before remediation, right? That's how they tell you to test. It's got to come out of like a tap, as close to your well water as possible. So if I have E. coli in my water from the test, I already have remediation installed and maintained. And I think that's the gap for me. And so I don't know if it's, I kind of feel like I could go two ways. I could say we don't require testing in a situation like this, but we recommend it. Or you get some sort of relief from testing if you have systems installed and you, as I said, have them properly serviced, right? I mean, I know it's different, but I draw a parallel to a septic system. People aren't required to check that all the time, right? We just heard about properties who, haven't had their system pumped for 20 years, right? So there's no requirement to maintain those. It's just recommended. And so kind of, where do we fall? Kevin?
I believe there is a requirement to have them pumped every 2 years if you want to not have to do a Title V to ensure the viability of the system. And I think that if we can somehow mirror that, where we keep a file on the well per property, and we see what the initial testing was when the company came out prior to putting remediation in. We see what the results were post remediation, and if those all look good and everything's being kept up under a maintenance and service agreement, I don't see a reason to test but every 5-10 years. Maybe it's 10 years, but it certainly shouldn't have to be every year if the homeowner is on top of it and they have a company coming to check on things and make sure the equipment's functioning properly. If we can set up the infrastructure for that in tandem, putting regulation like this in place, it seems like we can keep track of things and ease off on the annual testing because we'll know the status of each individual well.
If I may, I think generally best practice, I believe, I don't think it's written into the regulation, is testing pre and post treatment. What's going in, what's it coming out? I'll be honest, I'm a little bit torn that while water treatment systems can be obviously incredibly and make non-potable water potable, they can also be a source of contamination if they're not adequately maintained. And the only way, other than, I can come in and change filters and stuff, but that doesn't necessarily mean that the system has been cleaned outside of that. I can change a filter, but it doesn't necessarily mean I've done a full maintenance. And that I would hope that an agency who's coming in, if I have a contract for a service agreement with my system, that as part of that service agreement, they're going to come in, do their service, and then test the water to make sure the system is functioning appropriately, because that's ultimately the only way to test the system, is to test what's coming out of the system, that it is in fact functioning appropriately. And if they're testing it that way, I see no reason why, as long as it's meeting our criteria, that wouldn't meet our expectation. If you have some service agreement and they're coming in, if they're coming in once a year, but they're testing every 3 or whatever the number is, that would obviously, I think, meet a reasonable expectation of monitoring if that's being done. I guess I admit I'm not as concerned about necessarily testing it pre-treatment as I am post-treatment, because that's what matters.
Yeah,
obviously, it's nice knowing how potentially dirty it is going in, but I want to make sure it's safe coming out of the system. If I had to pick one as a public health person, I want to know what's coming out at the end rather than what's going in.
Dan, scroll up to point 2 on this page right here.
Yeah.
This says, the water sample to be tested shall be collected at the pump discharge or from a disinfected tap in the pump discharge line, and no eventual water treatment device be installed prior to sampling. It is specifically saying you must test the well as close to the well as possible, which is informative, is important, because you then have varying levels of remediation built in, right? So if you test my tap, it has gone through 3 systems. Right. But if you test my drinking water tap, it's gone through 4 systems total. And I think this is where I get really careful, because then if you turn around and say, like, well, I have to make sure everything's working. Now we're talking about tripling the tests just for me. Right. And I don't know. I'm not trying to say this is all about me, but I know these systems can get really complicated. And yes, my company, I'll be careful. I don't have a service agreement with them. It's just like most other things in my house. I call them annually because I take that upon myself to make sure it's serviced. Technically, I have a UV light bulb that starts to scream at me after 365 days. It says it doesn't work anymore because they don't guarantee the bulb will function correctly. But this is why this is my struggle with it, because you could come test the water coming out of my RO unit, and I don't really want to spend hundreds of dollars for that every time, because that system is maintained properly and it's replaced every year. And so that's my struggle. It's because and I know I have more systems than a lot of people probably, but I don't know where to land. Yeah.
I think that if we can put some language in here that states, when thinking about putting in a water treatment system after a well, the water should be treated as close to the well as possible. However, once an approved remediation system has been installed, the testing happens at the tap. And I think that if we can organize it similarly to how we do it for an innovative alternative septic system, where there's a maintenance agreement in place for the moving parts, for the jets and the fasts, and there's a company that comes and makes sure that's working once a year. And if the homeowner cancels the maintenance agreement, the board gets a notification on that. Those are sort of the fail safes I think we need to put in place. I don't know. I do believe that the wastewater companies that test the jets and the fasts, when an agreement expires or when the homeowner cancels, they do notify the board. And I think if we put something similar, a similar protection on the drinking water folks, that we could have our bases covered. But does it make sense to only test at the well when you're planning a remediation system, so you know what you have to put in?
I feel like it would be a question for a higher expert than us on why they called it out so clearly right here. And frankly, why it seems to ignore if you have systems installed.
Right. Well, maybe we need a section for where a system is installed. Because this is for a brand new well.
I was going to say I think we are kind of jumped ahead. If you read through this, they're talking about you don't test it until it's been flushed 3 times. They're talking about if it's in a bedrock well versus not. This is after the construction of the well has been completed and disinfected and prior to use as a drinking water well. This is brand new well, first time. So I agree. This is not the well that's been there for 20 years and are we testing pre or post? I think that's certainly a valid concern we need to think about. I think section 8 here is really looking at new construction, new well, what the expectation is and what should be tested prior to saying this is a potable water well approved by us.
Yeah, I struggle because I'm reading along the DEP page that is Protect Your Family, a guide to water quality testing for private wells. And it goes through a whole thing. Here's when you should test more frequently if these things are around your property. Otherwise, do it when you buy your house and then you can monitor over time. And it completely ignores any mention of if you have any system in place, how that should change what you do.
Yeah, I think their language wasn't as precise as it could have been. That I read section 8 here, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 all refer to I've put a new well in the ground. What do I need to do before it's considered okay? Then we get to 6. Now it's talking about every owner of the well should have it tested, laboratory, yada, 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 once a year.
Yep.
And now we're getting to, okay, so you've got a well in the ground. It's been okayed. Now, how do we provide ongoing monitoring and maintenance kind of piece? And it's not really clear, but I think when we go from 5 to 6, we've basically gone from new construction, new well to ongoing monitoring and maintenance or whatever the language is.
It's almost like we should separate. We should put a new section header right in there.
Ongoing monitoring or
existing
something,
well monitoring,
existing well.
maintenance. Yeah, like you said.
Yeah.
And start over at 1 where the owner of every well used for drinking water. Where number 6 is, change that to number 1 and start a new section maybe.
Yeah, section 8 Bravo or something. But yeah, so I think that's kind of a piece of it. So I think that when it's talking about testing as close to the well as possible without any treatment, because they want to know brand new well, what's coming out of the ground.
Yeah.
And depending on what's coming out of the ground, we're happy or we're not so happy. And now we're looking at remediation of some type before it's considered acceptable. So I think that's where they're getting that language from for this one, is that they don't want you to stick one in the ground. Oh yeah, it went through treatment and look, the water's great, without ever actually knowing what's coming out initially. So we may want to add some language if we do split that between 5 and 6 with new well versus ongoing monitoring or ongoing maintenance or ongoing assessment, adding in some language of best practice for site for water, obtaining the sample. I apologize. I'm glancing to see if there's anything in there because I thought we'd had that conversation of pre versus post versus both. You know, part of me is like, you want to know what's going into the system, but ultimately what I really care about is what's coming out of the system.
Right,
Even if you find, even if I test it today and we'll use PFAS as the easy one, there's no PFAS. And then I check after the system and there's no PFAS because there's no PFAS going in, so there's no PFAS coming out. 5 years from now, I check the outside and it's still no PFAS. I check the well side and it's, oh wait, there's now PFAS in my water, but my system, luckily, the system I picked is doing its job and it's actually clearing that. So there's still no, it's good to know that it's coming into my system, but at the end of the day, my system's doing its job and it's not impactful.
Yeah, but even that, right? You just doubled the cost. I mean, you went from $500 to $1,000 just on PFAS, right?
Yeah, and that's what I'm saying. That as long it's for me, I think my perspective is that as long as what's coming out of the system is meeting the criteria, then
Right.
I'm happy. Is it nice to know? Sure, but as long as it's, okay, so something has changed over time. Also, I'm a researcher. I like seeing change over time. But at the end of the day, really what matters is what's coming out of my system. If I don't have any treatment system, what's coming out of my well and that's changed, that's potentially concerning or significant. But if I have a system in place, as long as what's coming out of there is meeting the expectations and is safe, then what's going into it doesn't really matter all that much.
So it starts to get, I just worry it starts to get so hairy. Cause let's say you got, a refrigerator with one of those filters in it, right? And so you get your ice cubes out of there and it's got the little drinking water spout and that's filtering out, contaminant X that we say you should be filtering. But there's nobody that says you can't walk over to the kitchen sink and pour a glass of water and drink it. And so I kind of like what Jim alluded to, what's the staffing requirement and the paperwork and the record keeping to try to do this, and where are we going to cross the line or concerned about crossing the line of saying this is your Board of Health's recommendation, this is what you should be doing, we're going to do a little monitoring, and becoming this like it's getting crazy inside my house because I have different things, right? Like, do you have a child that may drink the bath water? Oh, then therefore we need to test that thing differently. You see, like I'm really worried about how crazy it could become, and who's gonna then manage it and understand what's going on within that household. And this isn't an extreme example. Like I said, I have a reverse osmosis tap in my kitchen for drinking water, right? That doesn't mean you can't walk over to one of my sinks and pour a glass of water and drink it. You'll be fine because it's clean for most everything else. You'll be okay. But do I have to double my testing then? Because that could happen? Or where's that line before we're saying as a Board of Health, this is what you should be doing, or what's your plan? Is it asking you what's your documented plan? Because at the same time, somebody could have, let's say somebody had terrible water. We deem it not safe for consumption, and they agree that their remediation plan is to have a bottled water delivery. Do they need to test? Do they ever need to test again if that's what they say their plan is? So do we care more about that people have a plan or the data that is existing in their system?
A lot to unpack there. Again, I think we can bring this back to some other folks for opinions as well. Certainly, I think my personal perspective is that, no, I'm kind of in the same place, that I've got town water, but yep, I've got a filter on my, my basement sink next to my, little spare fridge, and I've got the filter in the fridge, and I got that, like lots of us. And I think, obviously, we can't check every Brita filter you've got in your house or any other brand name you happen to choose. Sorry. That's obviously unreasonable. I think generalized, I think we need to, what is the intent? It is not checking every possible place someone can get water, but I think we need to be looking at the house water. What is the water in the house? If you choose to filter it more because you don't like the amount of chlorine that's coming from Littleton Water Department in their water, that's your call. But by the regulations, the water is clean, potable, and safe. So, I mean, that's kind of like, oh, well, now I have a filter on my dishwasher or on my refrigerator, so now I need to test it. I don't think that's our intent. And obviously, logistically, it's impossible. I think the intent really is the water, I don't want to say coming into the house, but coming out of your well through any house-wide system you have, is the water beyond that point safe and potable? If you're saying the stuff coming out of 90% of my taps does not meet the definition of potable water, then it's not potable water and the house is not in compliance. But I don't drink anything except for my Brita. Well, but that's not there. So my gut is like, what is the general status of the water in the house? If you choose to filter it 3 or 4 times beyond that, then that is either part of your big master plan, and then that's part of your plan and needs to be monitored, or you need to figure out a better house-wide solution to solve it. I'm not sure. I'd have to, again, go back and double check the regs. I don't think just having bottled water would meet the habitability requirement for potable water in the house, but I would have to, again, go back and double check the regulations. But go ahead, Mr. Baker.
I'd love to take some time, maybe over the weekend, to dig into this and separate those sections, new construction well versus existing well, and put together a section on monitoring and maintenance of an existing well, and the potability and testing of that water. And I think that'll kind of help to clear up the discrepancy that we're having a conversation on right now. And I'd also like to ask Jim about his thoughts on some of the definitions for agricultural irrigation well, as well as a geothermal well. And I think that if we can get those three things done by our next meeting, and I can make those updates to the document in the OneDrive for everyone to check out and then for us to discuss again, we'll be in a lot of better place. And maybe we can even, I can send it to Brenda and she can let everybody know that there's some edits made. And if folks want to take a look at that and maybe, adjust some of the grammar and anything else that might lead us to have a better conversation at our next meeting about this with everyone here. That might be the most effective way to finish this part of it. But I scrolled through the rest of the document, and I think the big one, and I know that we went through this and we had a long conversation in, I think it's section 15 on the variance piece of it. And we just sort of added that last line in there. In case of emergency, the board will convene a quorum to hear the variance request. In the case that, a well is malfunctioning and we have to do something. I think that's the big one there.
We do have a hand up in the audience. If I just do a couple quick things, and I do see your hand just around back. I'm not ignoring you. I'll be there in a moment. One for Mr. Baker. I appreciate you going out and getting some definitions. If you can also ask about not only like agricultural wells, but home irrigation wells. Mm-hmm. See if that should fall under the same language or if it's different. So if I've got a farm and I have a well for irrigating my farm, should we be following the same language definition and requirements for I put a well in so I can water my lawn all summer, and I have my little sign out front saying well water and use. Mm-hmm. I'm simply not sure, should those follow the same requirements, or should we split those out as two different options of things to think about? I think some of the concerns are potentially the same. Some of them are different. I'm just not sure. Yeah. So maybe some feedback
that's a great
detail from Jim
to figure out. Yeah, thank you. I would definitely ask him that.
We have two hands up now. I see both of you. One moment. The other big piece, obviously, and I have a feeling that the hands of the audience are going to be part of this, is frequency. We're still looking at the model regs. Are still talking about annual testing. So I'm trying to find back where we were just in section 8, page 11, I believe. Page 11. Section 6, as we just talked about.
I was going to suggest maybe combining, this paragraph is so confusing, maybe having a table that is contaminant and testing cycle, because the DEP has it either 1 year or 10 year, unless there's some other thing going on. And this list does not line up correctly.
Right. So split this out so it's clearer. And I mean, I think that as we're talking about, okay, if I have to test pre and post water treatment, that's doubling my cost. If I'm doing that pre and post, whatever, it says I'm doing that every year. Is that necessary? I know we talked about, and other places it's on change of property ownership, which may be, I think we had someone anecdotally say here in Littleton, it's about 7 years. So that means some folks will be testing every 9 months, theoretically for their well, and some folks won't test for 50. I'm not sure that piece of how do we figure that out? Do we do group testing? Like, oh, okay, this neighborhood's been tested and we know what the water quality is in the neighborhood. We've had lots of ideas. So I think that's something we look at, and certainly looking at cost on annual testing is concerning. And how do we find that balance? Do we need to test every single house with a well every single year? That's a lot of money for homeowners. It's a lot of overhead and administrative for the department. What is the cost to treat ratio here? How many tests do we have to do before we find a well that has an issue that needs to be addressed? How many tests, and where does that cost benefit analysis happen? My suggestion is, I'm not sure what the right answer to that is. I think doing it with ownership change. I think doing it with, I'll admit, part of me is thinking of rental property. How do we regulate rental property? Is that change of residence? Again, that could be very, very frequently in some places and almost never in others. How do we make that consistent? I think special use, that certainly we have the ability for residents to do cottage craft and do home cooking for commercial sales, that it kind of rides that line. Is it a commercial kitchen or isn't it? And what kind of water quality? Obviously it's like we need to maintain, in a commercial kitchen, we monitor water quality differently than we would in a residential kitchen, for example, versus the middle ground home kitchen but commercial use piece. I don't want this to be 5,000 pages because it's not going to be successful. It's not going to be useful for anyone. But I think we really need to figure out what that balance is between the public health, the libertarian folks who say it's my water, it's my well, leave me alone. Valid approach. The public health concern of contaminated water is a risk to members of the community, and how much it's going to cost and cost to treat. So if we don't have anything else pressing, I'm going to bounce to the audience and take some input there, and we can come back if that's acceptable to the board. All right. Mr. Rombacher's hand was up first, so I apologize for the delay. I'm promoting you to panelists, sir.
Hello, can you hear me?
Rambacher. We can. Welcome.
Hey, Mark Rambacher, Hartwell Avenue. I'm on the Libertarian. It's my water, leave me alone. Point of view, and it's not, I don't agree that it's a public health risk. It's my health risk. So I agree that you should require testing on change of ownership, and I think change on rental properties. I think it's a fair thing, but you have to make it available. As far as a lot of your discussion on filtering, the test should be done on things that are only done through the whole house filter, not on individual filters like your RO filter under your sink or anything like that. It should be on the whole house system. That's the way I believe it should be done. But if we go back, I think these should be, you're making recommendations that the testing should be done every 1 or 10 years, not shall be done. Because I'll go back to, let's say that I have a lot of PFAS in my water, but I never drink it. What's your, and I always drink bottled water. What are you going to make me do in my house? What is your requirement? How are you going to enforce any of this? Right? There's no point in testing and doing all of this if you can't enforce it. And I don't even know how you're going to enforce it. I have to have my water tested every year anyway. So that's going to be a fun thing. As far as a lot of the discussion on agricultural wells, I'd actually reach out to the Ag Commission and ask them, because I know a lot of the agricultural wells have their own testing requirements independent of yours. Also, I would make another point, if I can, you added on page 16, item number 10, you say no new well shall be constructed where municipal water is available. Well, first you spelled municipal wrong, but that's okay. But you also, you actually have a system that your own that is going to be violating that on Spectacle Pond, that you had to approve the well because they're not allowed to put in and hook to the public water system because they're not allowed to rip up the road. So you have your own conflict there. And I think that probably should also say no new drinking potable water, because you can put in irrigation systems. I believe even when their municipal is available. Finally, another question I have is in all of your setbacks, I assume that only applies to new wells being put in, not existing wells, that you're not going to condemn my well because it's too close to the road, for example. So that also needs to be clarified in your regulations. And I do support that, on change of ownership, you should require these tests to be in place, but I don't know how you're going to mandate what systems and what has to be done for mitigation, because, you know, what if I agreed, you know, as part of the transfer of cell that, you know, you agree you're not going to drink the water, right? You're only going to use bottled water. How are you going to enforce any of these requirements? So keep in mind, I understand what you're trying to do from the public health perspective, but you also have to do, you're putting in these regulations that you have enforcement power over, and I don't know how you're going to enforce what they are. So that's all I have. Thank you.
Thanks, sir.
Before you go to the next,
Yep.
On this, I don't remember this. Where did the no new well should be constructed?
I don't remember that discussion. I admit I'd have to go back and look. I don't know where that came from,
Okay.
or whose note that is, and I don't think I'm in the packet right now, so I can't see if there's a tag in the document of where that was.
Oh,
I
I had put all those notes in there after our discussion when we had the meeting.
so I mean,
I don't remember that point.
all I can think of is that potentially kind of using the Title V mindset of no drinking water, no dedicated. I'm not sure. I'm again.
I guess
it may have been my
guess
comment.
eyes
I don't
knows.
even know, but
I know we had a resident at one point, you know, talk about, because I think I had talked about you should be required. Should we require people, houses to connect to town water if it is available? But I don't see the flip as necessarily a requirement, because somebody had a valid point is, if you can have your own well and you can drink the water out of it if you so choose, then is that not actually a safe backup to a public system which is not guaranteed 100% reliable, right? So I find it very odd to say that you are not allowed to have your own drinking water well if somebody wants to save on water rates and have a backup system that protects them, or frankly, as we are already mentioning, an irrigation well. Like I could be using town water for drinking and use my well water for irrigation just to save me money. So maybe we need more discussion about that, about where that idea came from, because
yeah, it's just I don't disagree. Personally, I'm not sure about Mr. Baker. Yeah, I'm not sure what the rationale is. That's some rationales are certainly would be helpful, just as we discussed, not necessarily for our final version, but as we're going through, as we make suggestions, because I'm thinking we should do this because, and then we clean it up at the end when it's ready for final review. I do have one more person in the audience with a hand up, Mr. Kroback. I'm bringing you to the panel. One moment. You should be getting a note to click on. Again, I think the Spectacle Pond Road question is valid that Mr. Rambacker brought up, although depending on how you lead it, municipal water is available. In that case, municipal water isn't available in a reasonable foreseeable length of time because it's 5 years out. So in that one, I think it's kind of a push as far as being in conflict with the proposed one. The action taken by the board was not in conflict with the regulation. This is not the current regulation, and in that case, municipal water isn't available. We've tried every effort, and it's not happened yet. It's simply the town has said no, that water is not available from the street from the town on that property. So. But it's certainly something we need, I think, again, look at of what that is. And I'm not sure what the rationale was, but I agree with many of the comments here. I apologize. I hit promote and I don't see Mr. Kroback.
Yep, I'm here.
There we go. Sorry.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if my computer was just slow or not. Welcome to the Board of Health meeting, sir.
Thank you. My name is Chris Kroback on Mattawanakie Trail. I have, first of all, I believe thank you for posting the revisions that you proposed. I provided markup comments and emailed them to Brenda. I don't know if you saw them. I don't intend to address each one of those in the 2 minutes I'll discuss here, but I did want to mention a couple things that I noticed in the discussion that I didn't include there. One is that with the proposed testing and the I would assume variances and hearings that could result from systems that don't pass and further testing, I think there's additional costs that would come from that would expand just beyond the testing cost of having to have those hearings, have those remediation discussions and all that. And it could be an expensive process that I think the town should consider what that full cost would be. And I would, if I could propose a method that might be more cost effective overall, would be for the town just to sample everything that's in that number 3 in those recommended testing requirements. Let's say 1 well every 1,000 feet to map out a type of contamination level in the groundwater, if that's what it is that we are looking for, and only requiring certain types of remediation or notification of residents that this is in the groundwater, just to let people know. That's one way I think that would be useful for protecting public health, that would not impose on individual well owners spaces. Right, so that's my comments on there. And in general, some other comments I noticed about what was in the regulation. Some questions about how geothermal wells would be considered. I think in some of the well location requirements, wasn't clear if that includes geothermal. Like if I have a well on my property that I'm drinking well, and I want to install a geothermal because I want to get rid of oil and I want to make the environment better, right? What are the limitations there? Can I put a geothermal well within a certain distance of a drinking well? I didn't see anything in terms of setbacks and things like that that were specific for that. Right, that was on the geothermal wells. Last, I thought that the whole section about testing requirements, that entire section is about testing requirements. The only thing that was about water quality requirements was number 13. So I feel like that could almost be its own separate section that would maybe clarify some of the confusion and discussion that we've been having, just to make a separate section about water quality requirements rather than just water testing requirements. Because I thought that this, even though you reference it should be the Massachusetts DEP standards, when I tried to look up what those standards were, it wasn't clear. There was a lot of standards out there, 5 different tables. Do they match up with the elements that are being requested to be tested in here? It wasn't clear to me. And there was also something I saw that in those DEP standards that called out how private wells are not subject to 310 CMR 22. I didn't follow that down that rabbit hole, but just a suggestion that item number 13 in section 8, I feel like should be a whole separate section that we should elaborate on. And then last, just if you can discuss a little bit about what would the process really look like if a resident were to fail a test. What's the mechanism for determining what the next steps would be if this was a regulation? Think about, like, would that be a variance request that would be needed? Would there be like an additional testing needed afterwards? Like, that whole part wasn't clear how that would actually be enforced. That's all. Thanks.
All right. No, thank you very much for your input. Again, there's some great questions. I'm not sure about. We'll talk to some of a little bit higher level of expertise in. Again, I mentioned doing that sample, a neighborhood or an area sample test for a section. Again, it's going to be, I don't know what the answer to that one is. If testing every 1,000 feet would be adequate to meet the expectation, if that would be an adequate enough sample size to provide the information that would be required. And again, the same piece, it's do we, in that piece, if the town is running those tests, then the residents are going to be paying for it one way or the other. Either all the taxpayers are going to be paying for it through town testing, or the well folks are going to be testing somehow. And again, I'm not sure what that solution is, but it's an interesting idea. Thank you very much for the discussion around offsets between, because theoretically I could have 3 different wells in my acre here. I could have an irrigation well for my lawn. I could have a potable water well for my drinking water, and I can have a geothermal well for my heating and cooling system. And I've got 3 wells. And how does that work? And again, I'm not an expert, so that's another great piece that we'll need to bring back to some folks with a better understanding of some of the technical standards that are beyond certainly mine. I'm not sure about Mr. Baker or Dr. Wason's expertise in some of these pieces, but this is why we, as challenging as I'm sure these are for many folks, this is actually a great descriptor or rationale for why the DEP produces model regulations. That while we may look at them and not agree with them, that I'm a nurse. Dr. Wason's a physician. Mr. Baker is real estate and construction. We have lots of skills that we bring to the table, but we are not geologically environmental engineers. The DEP has those resources. They can pull in these folks to pull together what's reasonable, what is best practice, what is logical based on their expertise. And they can set that table up with a wide variety of experts to put this together and have basically the discussions we're having now there, without the piece of, okay, how do you operationalize it? Because they don't need to operationalize it. They can sit around the big conference table and write it all up and say, good luck. So, but I think these are important things to bring back. Yes, Dr. Wason.
No matter what we do with this, Chris alluded to it and we talked about it previously. I really would like us to figure out some system where we can help share results, and whether that's, and maybe it's going to, we have to go by council to say, can we publish the tests online? You can be able to say like, oh, this pinpoint location had this test on this date, for one, or for two, at the very least, be able to have some sort of communication to people and say, a neighbor of yours, or a water test was done within whatever feet of you, and this is what it came out as, FYI. I unfortunately don't think that will end up being able to replace tests, especially if we're talking about what am I really drinking, and even my next door neighbor, there's no guarantee our wells are at the same depth, and so many variables. But all that aside, I would love a notification system to help people potentially understand changes in their local well environment.
Again, if my neighbor moves tomorrow and they test their well and there's something that we weren't expecting in it, as a thoughtful individual and caring for my family, that if I was aware of that, I would hopefully go, we never had that in our water. They now have it in theirs. Perhaps I should test mine.
Even if it's clean,
I'm with you.
Wouldn't you want to know if your neighbor sells a house and they had a clean well? It's reassuring.
Of course, that exactly. I don't mean either way, but just to have that information is valuable. Absolutely. I think that is a much bigger discussion. I think for the board and truthfully for the town around the sharing of information and transparency. I went out I was in Boston the other day for an event and grabbed a bite to eat, and there's a big sign on the door, Boston Public Health Commission, this place has been inspected and here's their grade on the door. We have other communities in the area who have the same thing. We have places who don't have it on the thing, but if you have a question, please ask to see our most recent report. And we don't have that here in Littleton. I'm not sure we should. I'm not saying we should or we shouldn't. I just don't know. I have my own personal opinions, but I think some of that level of transparency can be really, really valuable. Sharing of where you are. What do I know? What does my town know about my neighbor's water that I don't know? That potentially is my water? What does the town know about the cleanliness of a food establishment? Is it just barely passing, but passing? Or nope, this place is spotless. You could do surgery here. Would it change my mind? I don't know. It does add, while the transparency and the knowledge and, what does my town know that I don't is a big question. It does get into politics and business and all those kind of pieces. If I have 2 restaurants next door to each other and one has an A on the door and one has a C- on the door, passing but barely, which door do I go to? And what does that do to our commercial base? Lots of questions. So I think that's a really kind of a bigger question of how, as a public health piece, that we share information, I think are infectious disease support tool is one of the starting points of what do we know? Here's what we know, and we're sharing what we know. But making some transparency is critical in general for our community, for any community. But I think for a public health side, I think that's an interesting idea if we can identify a way of doing that is privacy compliant, easily accessible. That, you know what, if a house is being sold or it's a rental or a commercial kitchen or those kind of things, that's information that's coming through the door. Why can't we make that somehow available with some anonymized data? The idea of a house within 1,000 feet of your, a well within 1,000 feet of your well has been tested. It's an interesting idea that, you know, may be worth looking at. I'm not sure if that necessarily needs to be in the regulation, that piece of it. I think that could probably just be an operating procedure for the board when we get that far. But
I do believe that's how these discussions started when the Littleton Water Department test results became public and, you know, let people know. So I think whatever model the town adopts, it should be what helps residents most directly.
Thanks, sir.
Can I also add, it's much different releasing information on public establishments, records, and private establishments. Like, I don't know that the public has any right to know whether I own my house or I rent my house, right? Which they will now know potentially if you're releasing these records.
Well, I hear you, Mr. Robert. I think we said that transparency is useful, and, you know, we obviously have not got anywhere near that far yet. And that if it was, certainly my own perspective would be finding some way to anonymize it, so that if we did share that it was a well within some distance that is big enough that it's not identifiable, but close enough that it's meaningful. If I say well within 3 miles of yours, that's probably not going to provide you meaningful information. If I say within 50 feet of yours, well, we pretty much narrowed that down to whose well it is. So again, bigger conversation down the road, not necessarily part of this requirement, but certainly something to think about moving forward.
I already know it's Kevin, so. You want me to wave to you?
Kevin's on mute.
Thank you.
All right. So I think we knew this coming out into this meeting. We still had plenty of homework to do on this. Was there any other kind of pressing pieces that we should do some homework that we should assign, share, so that we come back with some fresh information for our next round of discussions?
I think what I'd like to do is take a look at Mr. Krobach's markup that he sent over to Brenda, which we haven't seen. I think there'll be some really great points in there that we can take to heart and really try and incorporate into this document. And maybe if I can somehow integrate those into a working document, just so we can sort of see what's out there. I'll maybe put it in a different color, so everybody on the board can have it. We can put it in our packet for the next meeting, just to keep the conversation going in a positive way.
No, that'd be great. Thank you, Kevin.
And I really liked your segue there to the ID decision support tool. You brought that in right at the tail end of your last one. So great.
It's all part of the plan.
Yeah.
It's all part of the plan.
If
I
Dan
used to
would
be a
stop
teacher.
sharing,
I will stop sharing. I apologize. See, my plan failed right there. I had a plan, and I used to be a teacher. I used to segue a lot. I'm out of practice, so I forgot to close my screen. There you go, Matt. Do we have any other further discussion? Would we like to, do we need to vote to continue the public hearing?
it's a discussion of a public hearing.
It is a discussion. Thank you. I was going to say I'm working through my pile of notes back to my agenda, which was at the bottom now.
All right, here is this week's infectious disease support tool. Predominant variant of COVID-19 is still EG.5. It's at 28%. We still have HV1 is kind of crept up from third place to second place. These are all still Omicron variants. They all still have, I feel like every single time a new variant comes out and starts to make a little headway, they say it's more transmissible, will still respond well to our existing vaccinations, and we don't really know if it'll cause more serious disease. However, what I will say is that there does seem to be some strong feelings that spikes are getting larger every single time, probably due to reduced herd immunity and reduced vaccination levels. So, COVID-19 is here to stay, right? It's not going anywhere. It's basically endemic now. But if we don't kind of still stay on top of it, it will continue to spike and grow and potentially cause more serious illness. So going back to once again the plug, please go get an up-to-date booster vaccination soon if you have not already done so. I know previously I had said, hey, you just go get both at the same time so you save some time. There have been at least one study recently published of a increased risk of stroke for mostly elderly or at-risk individuals if they happen to have both vaccinations, the flu and COVID-19 done at the same time. So if you want to be a little safer, go ahead and get those on 2 different days, 2 different times. But please go get your vaccination. Data on here we can't look at. The Massachusetts COVID-19 reporting tool has been completely changed. I have not been able to get better data yet. So ICU bed access is not available anymore. The up-to-date vaccinations is not available anymore. They're working on something, and our 2-week case counts are not available anymore. I might ask Jim to see if he has some better access to the 2-week case counts, because what I could find from Massachusetts was it just didn't line up right. So I got to keep digging in to try to get some better data there. The wastewater data is still reported. Both numbers actually pretty low, 300s and 200s recently. So I don't know what this is going to say for our winter, because we're kind of starting to lose some numbers. Dan, do you have any kind of anecdotal information about the ICUs?
I can speak to my little hospital, and we are over capacity 5 days out of 7, hospital wide. So keep yourself well and don't go to the hospital. I can't speak for other hospitals in the area, but I know from my, if ours are that busy, odds are the others are similar.
We're kind of approaching the end of arbovirus season. No more mosquitoes, hopefully. But both, we are still low on both West Nile and Eastern equine encephalitis. Influenza has started up anew at the state level. So this is updated data. Is the weekly flu status is currently low, but influenza season has started. Those vaccinations are also available. And then lastly, RSV, it is RSV season. Here is our little chart for Massachusetts. So it's a 1-year chart, which is kind of nice. So here's exactly where we were, last year on this day, basically, or last year tomorrow. And here's where we are today. So it's going up. This is a scale I will have to throw out to you guys. The low, medium, high, this is not actually reported at the Massachusetts level. This is CDC data. So they don't have any sort of risk or status attached to the numbers. They just show you the chart. So I might throw out, we should probably come up with kind of some reasonable definitions of what we think are kind of a low, a medium, and a high. Right now, we are over, we are about an 8% positivity rate on tests. But is that what's important, or is it counts? I kind of put it at yellow simply because we are no longer at that flat baseline where I feel like things are low. We are accelerating on an upward trend. So RSV is out there. If you have symptoms, who knows what it's going to be, whether it's RSV, whether it's influenza, whether it's COVID-19, whether it's something else. Please take care of yourself, take care of those around you, wash your hands, wear a mask. It's okay. It doesn't have to be COVID-19 to wear a mask around others, or ask your family members to maybe wear a mask in close proximity, because as other recent studies have shown, masks do help reduce the risk of infection from people who are ill. So please take care of yourself and those around you. That's what I got.
Thank you, sir. Any questions, Mr. Baker? No, this, as always, Dr. Wason, thank you so much for sharing. It's
Actually,
unfortunate that...
Sorry, one little tidbit. I was just very curious. is that strep is running around town right now, or around our community. And curiously, normally strep, people are think, oh, strep throat, but whether it's a strain of strep or something particularly aggressive, I was talking to a provider who has seen skin infections with strep, ear infections with strep, and so strep's out there as well. So if you or somebody you know starts to have some infectious symptoms, it doesn't necessarily have to be a sore throat. It could be strep in another format. And the reason that's important to know is that if you get tested and you are tested positive for strep, you can take antibiotics for that, which you would not take for run of the mill, as it were, viral illness of your ear or skin or lungs. So be aware that strep's out there. So if you are feeling ill, please try to go see a provider and potentially get tested.
Thank you, sir.
That was it.
All right. I believe we are at administrative matters. I believe we have one set of minutes that are ready for review. Has anyone had a chance to look at the September 13, 2023 minutes?
We looked
believe-
through those last time. I think the only thing that was incorrect was the date.
The
at
date.
top.
Correct.
I would have to abstain from voting on those minutes because I was not in attendance. So you don't have a quorum.
I think we can vote with an abstention.
Because quorum is 3, so it would be 2 votes, which would be the majority. So it doesn't need to be a majority of the board. It needs to be a majority of the quorum, basically.
Attendees. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
If we had 2, we are a quorum, so we can still vote and function. And
Want to make sure.
So, but I have to abstain as well.
in that case, we cannot. We could take action, but it wouldn't go anywhere because it wouldn't pass because there'd only be 1 vote. So
Okay.
I'm going to table the minutes of September 13, 2023 to our next meeting. So watch, give me 1 moment. Again, keeping my notes. Administrative matters. Any other administrative matters?
I had a question, and maybe I don't know if we have the answer to this, but I'm wondering if you've heard from Michelle Vibert regarding the health director position and where we are in that process, and if there's anything I can do to help sort of move things along and get to the next step.
I know, absolutely great question. Thank you so much. You are jumping way ahead. You looked at my notes.
It did.
So, we actually have CVs coming in. We have a good number of candidates. I'm trying to look at the quick count. We're
17.
about 17. I was going to say about 15 from my list. We have a large number of candidates of a variety of experiences and education levels. So, Matt actually and I are both looking at the CVs to start with in conjunction with Michelle, and it sounds like the standard town process is 2 rounds for this level. So an initial HR and representative process, and then as a director or similar level, either a full board interview or a public board interview as well.
Great. So it's moving forward. That's great.
It is moving forward. Yep. Dr. Wason
Mm-hmm.
actually has provided his notes. I'm about 3/4 of the way through the CVs as well. I think we have a couple differences comparing his notes to mine, but nothing major. But we do have a number of candidates who are exciting as we're looking at them. So we'll
Great.
see where this moves forward. But we are making good progress. So hopefully we can have a short list to Michelle for scheduling that first round. Hopefully by the beginning of the week. So.
Thank you.
Any other administrative matters? Any correspondence?
Oh, actually, on the recruitment, Kevin, if Michelle didn't get in touch with you, feel free to suggest any listing places, because I know you'd had ideas about that in the past, as where we could potentially post it to try to draw in as many candidates as possible. So
Will
please
do.
feel
Yeah, I'll
free
reach
to
out, see if I can help.
either check, ask her where she's posted it exactly, because I don't know off the top of my head, but you might have
Okay.
some good input on that.
Thank you.
All right, any correspondence? I say only piece I have is the Cannabis Control Commission are working on new regulations, and it was shared out, should be in your emails. As far as the Board of Health involvement or placement into that process, probably the only place that it falls into is the host community agreement. A big piece of the new regulation is reworking what the host community agreements look like, how they work, what the requirements can and can't be in that. Obviously all outside the Board of Health piece, but there is a portion where Board of Health, if we choose to make a requirement, as long as it's a public health base and has a rationale, those are allowed into host community agreements. So we do have a voice in HCAs if we feel we need to have a voice in them. And that wasn't boards of health and health authorities were not really as part of the HCA process in the previous regulations. The new ones, boards of health can have a role if either we are sought out to have a role or if we choose to proactively push as part of that process of a concern or a need based on public health. So I do not know where we stand as a community, what that looks like, if we have anything in the moment, but just be aware that that might be something that we wouldn't necessarily have anticipated in the past that may come before us as things move forward with cannabis host community agreements with any vendor. I think that was the only correspondence I had.
I didn't see that one go to Jim. Can you get it to him and ask for his initial input on that, since he represents so many other communities?
Mm-hmm. I can do that. And I don't believe I had any other correspondence. Does anybody have any member updates, correspondence, anything they'd like to share for the good of the group? Mr. Wason?
The only other email I saw was about 245 Foster Street, a preliminary industrial subdivision that was forwarded to us. And it says, any comments appreciated before December 1st. I haven't gone into it at all, but it becomes one of these like, hold on, what are we supposed to be approving something, or we only have one meeting for December 1st?
I thought when I looked at it, it looked like they actually hadn't put through the definitive plan yet. But hold on, I'm pulling it back up myself now.
It says any comments appreciated before. It doesn't feel like a deadline for us. But I was concerned about that because actually our next meeting is currently scheduled for Thanksgiving Wednesday.
I hear a and coming after that sentence.
Just throwing it out there.
So the 245 Foster Street, the preliminary subdivision, it looks like right now it is simply a subdivision. It doesn't sound like they actually have a more definitive plan of uses. It looks like they are just trying to split the property at this point. But I will share the note that we have. Property owner at 245 Foster Street has applied to the planning board for preliminary subdivision approval for a 2-lot industrial subdivision. No detailed development proposal has been submitted. The current plan is to create the new lots. So the subdivision plan is in fact just a subdivision. We're just dividing one property into two. Jim is on this one. So I think at this point, my perspective is we probably don't have a lot of input because it's taking one piece of property and making it two from a Board of Health perspective. And our biggest concerns generally with the subdivision is adequate water, adequate sewer or septic, that at this point, without a recommended or suggested or definitive plan of use, I'm not sure we can really have anything that we need to address yet. I think it won't be until there's a definitive plan of we want to put X on this property, and now it's a matter of is it feasible with the space and all those good questions. So there is a link in your emails. It looks like, I see if it went to all of us. It did go to all of us in your email. A link to the town website with the proposal. I apologize. I'm just reskimming.
It just looks, it's just dividing it into two. I mean,
plot,
when this comes to
yeah.
fruition, it'll be, hundreds and hundreds of units with a wastewater treatment plant or a connection to town sewer. So they're not.
And
even
at
close.
that point, it's going to be, that's when it's not a subdivision necessarily review, but it's going to be construction approval review, shared system, whatever it looks like. So, we can certainly reach out to Jim and see if he has any concerns. Certainly it goes through him as it's kind of the normal process as part of the application process. If we'd like, we can ask to put this onto our next one for a more formal review. I'll admit, I'm looking at it. I'm not sure really if there's, as opposed to some of the other division plans where, nope, here's our subdivision plan. We're going to be dividing this 20 acres into 10 houses and shared system and all those pieces where we really have a concern. At this point, I'm not sure we have anything actionable or any recommendations that we want or need to make based on the information we have so far. But
then I would be comfortable if either you or Jim then just responded to Maren so that she had a response to that effect.
All right, I'm going to if it's acceptable to the members, I'm going to defer this to Jim and ask him to just touch base and say this is if from our concerns. I think my personal is I don't see a lot that we're going to act on or make recommendations on with a simple, at this point, property division. But we will defer to Jim, and if he has more concerns, I'm sure he will bring it back to us and we can take more formal action.
Sounds good.
All right. Any other comments, questions, concerns from the board?
The schedule.
All right. Schedule.
Yeah. So our next meeting is scheduled for the 22nd, which is the Wednesday before Thanksgiving. And then November is a 5-week month. So if we meet on the 22nd, we would not meet till the 13th. So and then our next meeting will be the 13th and 27th of December. So we don't have everybody here, but one thing I would say is we could move the 22nd to the 29th as our last meeting in November and still keep the 13th and 27th of December. Or maybe go to the 6th and 20th of December instead of the 13th and 27th. Or I don't know. I'm the only one person. I think I feel most strongly about the 22nd.
And I don't think that is a feeling that it's just yours. I would propose, as Dr. Wason said, I think a move to the 29th, as long as LCTV is available for the 29th. I would agree with that move. I think that's reasonable. That gives us, so we do have, it'll give us a slightly longer gap, but then 29, 13, 27, 13th and 27th are both reasonable dates and on our regular schedule. So we're not moving our whole schedule out a week forever and ever. I think that's a minor under reasonable change while still maintaining the rest of our schedule appropriately. I do know we have one hearing that was continued from our last meeting that we'd planned on being, they were continued from 2 meetings ago that were planned for this meeting, and they were not ready to go tonight. So that there will be a delay for that, but it sounds like they've worked through their client side, the property owner side, to the delay is less impactful than it could be. So I think a delay to the 29th for that hearing probably is reasonable. I think it's a reasonable accommodation for the board members as well as for LCTV and Brenda. I think that's pretty reasonable. So I'm happy to take a motion that or can we just do this administratively? I don't know. Let's do it administratively. We're going to change our November 22nd meeting to November 29. And Brenda is still here, so we will ask Brenda if she can to, one, let us know her availability, and if she can check with LCTV and confirm their availability for the 29th. I'm not looking at the town calendar, I'm looking at my personal calendar, so I'm not sure if we have other meetings on the opposite Wednesdays that would impact their availability. So we will double check with them as well. If they are unavailable on that date, is there any will the board? Again, I think going all the way to the 13th for us is a long time. So I know lots of boards of health who do monthly meetings. So, but I think for us and the kind of the culture of our town and the expectations, that could be a long wait for folks. I don't know if it could be that we have no hearings. I simply don't know, but 29th, pending confirmation from LCTV. And if something changes, we will share it offline and come up with a new plan.
Sounds great.
I actually just got an email from Brenda saying she apologizes. Her mic is not working on her computer. She is available on the 29th and she will check with LCTV for us. So Brenda, we're sorry we can't hear your voice, but thank you very, very much. We appreciate it. And all right, any other questions, comments, concerns? Thank you for bringing that up. I appreciate it, Matt.
I'd like to make a motion to adjourn.
So why don't you do that, sir? I have a motion to second roll call vote. Mr. Baker.
Kevin Baker votes yes.
Dr. Wason.
Matt Wason, yes.
And the chair votes yes. Thank you very much. The Littleton Board of Health, November 8th, 2023 meeting is an adjournment. Thank you, Brenda, as always. Dave, welcome to the Board of Health. We appreciate your help tonight. Thank you so much for all your work. And see you guys soon, and we will email for updates.